everybody. I'm Bill Gentry. I am now speaking to you from Santa Fe, which, trust me, is almost, if not really, actually another planet. But I'm here with Marc again. And Marc, you were just talking to me. We met first. Tell me, go ahead with that little story about how we first met.
Yeah, when I graduated from, I guess it was Missouri State, Southwest Missouri State, they call it Southwest Missouri State, back in 1990, and I was hired on by your father right in 1991. And so we were talking a little bit. That's when I want to say I met you because I didn't really physically meet you till I think it was a sales meeting at Table Rock Lake, and that's a whole nother story at that time because that was
I remember some of that.
That one. But prior to that, it was just
there was people going to the hospital in that meeting.
There was Mark Bergmanis. You remember that guy?
I know exactly the story. Yeah, he worked for me.
We're going to talk about Korea today. For those who are interested in this podcast, I have a list of questions here that I try to sound, not canned or anything like that. But I was reading one of your questions, and it said something about let's talk about Korea in the 80s, right? And I was thinking, well, shit. I mean, I didn't know you were in that part of the country because when I first talked to you, you were in California. And you were, I think at that time, getting together with Audrey, or maybe had just met her, or it was somewhere around in there. So I didn't know you had this prior, maybe I'm wrong, but maybe I didn't know you had this prior life to California. So maybe you can give us a little timeline, because I think a lot of your adventures and stuff like that, you're like, started with positronic
from the mass
right?
population. They were done on the sly. I was a secret salesman.
Listen, Positronic funded a lot of your shenanigans, right? So let's start out. So
come on, Marc, let's stay friends.
So let's.
All right, well, okay. So my first.
Where were you in the 80s? Tell me about your 80s.
What happened is when the family business burned down, I came back from California, where I was living as an artist and making a living as an artist, a glass etching artist, and company burned down, the Rogersville factory. I'm sure you heard about that. And so I came back.
Glass etching artist, really? I did not know. See, that's more I didn't know about it. What were you like? Did you work at in Branson or blowing those little?
No, we're talking Los Angeles.
Oh, I thought you were a glass
Watts on Atlantic Boulevard at a glass etching company, and we were doing mostly work for the casinos in Vegas.
Really?
Very intricate, detailed carvings of glass.
Really?
And I worked my way up the food chain. By the time I left, I was a manager at a competitor to my original company. But the company burned down. It was tragedy, unbelievable. I gave notice the next day and moved back to Springfield, and I started to work in the rebuild. And in the middle of that process,
what year is this?
83.
83. Okay. Just getting a timeline, that's all for my
83. And so I started to train as a salesman and train doing trade shows. I think for 1 year, all I did for the company was trade shows.
And I will tell you this, just on that note, the trade show booth that you built has put many a salesman into, I think, traction or something like that. Because I think somebody referred to it as a jewelry cabinet at one point in time.
The first show we had that booth, we won best booth of the exhibition event award.
Did you?
So anyhow, let me get doing a trade show in Seoul, Korea.
Can I just edit one more thing? You can edit this out. But what the best part about it was.
This might be the best part of the whole video.
was putting the booth back into the crate because you could tell who the next person when the booth came out. You're like, what the fuck is this? It would like explode out of the box.
Proof.
You'd open the box. Oh my god! So anyway,
it was gorgeous, and our products were like jewels. I mean, I'm sure
it was like a jeweler's. So anyway, your first trade show somewhere around the 80, 84, 85, you're in Korea, right?
Well, the first time I left America on business, the mandate was to spread around the globe, not to be so vulnerable to having one factory and customer base just in America. So I began my journeys to Asia with a trip to trade show in Seoul, Korea. at an exhibition, and it was, it was the beginning of the new part of my life. The most interesting thing to me, and I would say of all the places I've ever been and still go to, Korea is the most phenomenally massive, successful change of going from really poverty and a downtrodden society after the Korean War to becoming what it is now. It's one of the top 6 economies in the world. My hat goes off to, I give so much credit to, I have so many good friends in Korea, and they are hardworking. They play hard, they work hard, they're ruthless, they're intelligent. So I can't say enough positive about so many of the things I've learned about Korea. But as I'm flying into Korea, first time, I'm on Pan Am Airlines, not in business anymore. I used to go from Seattle to Seoul because this was just the beginning of what became more trips. On the airplane, 90% of the people on all the flights over there were GIs. They were American military going to the base. That was, I believe the base was called Itaewon. It was the part of town was Itaewon, right in the center of Seoul, Korea. But flying in, the plane is coming in over the terrain, and I'm expecting one of the world's largest cities, which Seoul is. And there's no lights. Where are the lights? Where's the city? I mean, this is bizarre. I expected to see a glowing metropolis. We fly in, we land, and I progress on my first visit, to run a trade show as part of the American Pavilion, working through the embassy. But as I learned later, there was no lights because people back then couldn't afford lights and electricity. It was a poor country. It's like you might think of Mexico 20, 30 years ago. You fly in and it's desert and there's very few lights. You're landing out in the middle of nowhere, and that's kind of the way it felt when I first flew into Seoul. It was a poor country just beginning its ascendance to success. So I flew in and became, set up this trade show. It was the first one I'd done overseas, and a lot of the booth was just kind of simple, pop-up type stuff. You bring in, you toss posters up on the wall. And of course, I didn't speak any Korean. And this is way back before there's fax machines. It's way back before really pretty much anybody spoke English in Asia. So you had to find, special people who you could get as translators. So through the embassy, I found this young lady. They gave, her to me. They offered her services to me. Her name was Yun Kim. And I would say within 24 hours, I was madly in love with Yun Kim. There's one thing that Korea has as a resource, it's beautiful women.
Spoiler alert for Bill, right? Spoiler alert, Bill film has
Yun Kim. All right. If you ever meet a group of Koreans, I think somewhere around 80% of them are their last name, their surname is Kim. And Kim means gold. You can look it up. Gold. So 80% of the people in Korea are Mr. Gold and Mrs. Gold. Well, Yun, she said was the spelling. She said, my first name is Silver. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is unbelievable. I mean, I'm working with silver and gold. And she was gorgeous and she spoke English. She was our translator. And I'm like, I love Korea.
I'm never
I love
going
Asia. I love Korea. And I'm working with silver and gold. Other than that, the trade show wasn't a huge success. It was a coming in, scratching the surface, getting my feet wet, beginning the process of.
Were you by yourself? I mean,
well, our company was small back then, Mark, and there had been some people who had been out and done a trip or two to Asia. I think it was Taiwan, and they begged my father, please don't make me ever have to go back there again. I got the job by, I was the last resort.
Nobody else
kid, man. I'm like 24, 25 years old. So I took to international travel, let's say, swimming or whatever the term might be.
Yeah.
And I got my feet wet in Korea. My second trip to Korea was after I'd left the company and then came back, and I was working in California, like you had mentioned.
Okay.
That when you first heard about me, I was living in Sunnyvale. So we started to do a lot of business, more and more business, in California, especially. We were a Midwest company originally, doing mostly aircraft type components for, the McDonnell Douglases and the King radios in the Midwest. But we started to do a fair amount of business with a lot of these adventurous startups, especially in the computer industry in the Bay Area. And we were doing a project with a company called Tandem Computer. You remember Tandem Computer? All right, they were inventors of the fault-tolerant computer.
Yeah, well, I don't remember that, but anyway. So Sunny.
So my second trip, what? Go ahead.
So Sunnyvale, that's up by that's up. Just trying to get people. Sunnyvale's up by San Francisco, right?
Yeah, it's the heart of the Silicon Valley.
All right. So yeah, back
in the Mountain View.
This is right around. This is right around the time when.
This is 87, I think, 86.
This is like somebody had just lit the wick on the telecommunications boom. Because we didn't have cell phones and stuff like that. I mean, they maybe had them, but they weren't like what we have today, right?
The first cell phone I ever saw, and as you know, they weren't cell phones, they were car phones.
Yes, that's exactly right. You're right.
The first cell phone I ever saw was probably on my third trip to Korea. And there was this very well-connected salesman who we'd sort of met somebody who introduced them to me to try and be our agent in Korea. And he was very wealthy, drove around in a limousine. I sit in the back.
What?
Yeah, he had a driver. So many of the wealthy people over in Asia have drivers still, but especially back then. His sister was married to a general.
Wow.
So,
in the Korean army or the U.S.
The Korean army.
Okay.
So he had connections, and I'll get into some of that. But let me talk about the second trip to Korea, where we flew in to deal with some cable assembly issues of crimping of contacts. And so I land, and somebody meets me from this company in Korea, and we do this like 4-hour drive out into the countryside of Korea. And Korea is a gorgeous country. It's like 85% of Korea is mountains. Wow. And then in the valleys, you have these quaint, gorgeous, organized rice farms and farms of various vegetables. So it's farms in the valleys, these very beautiful homes. The farmers were usually not necessarily that poor. So they would have like an estate, and they've got, the shape, the little curved end on the typical Asian building. So we drive for 4 hours through the mountains, through the rice fields, and we come to this giant factory. I think 5,000 employees, 4,990 of them are women. And there's like 10 guys who are the kings running this.
Sounds like your kind of place, man.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm brought into the lobby and escorted by some of these, pretty ladies in there, and they're still all back in those days wearing kimono-like gear or outfits. And we go into the office of the chairman of the company. They're usually not called presidents over there. They're managing directors or presidents. And this guy was the owner.
Emperor, I think.
He was like the emperor. And we go in and we have a meeting. And the conference room back in those days was not a typical conference room, where you're sitting in a chair. We sat on pillows on the floor. And of course, there's only one person in there who speaks both Korean and English. And he's translating. And we're trying to figure out what the issue is on why our products are not working with their equipment. Well, it turns out their equipment wasn't compatible with our products, and it wasn't a very difficult solution or solve. But I would say I was right in the middle, and I was crossing through the veil. There was always this talk about the mysterious Orient and the veil that kind of protected them from the West and always made it very mysterious. And I go into this room, this conference room, and I'm surrounded. I almost felt like there should have been billows of opium smoke flowing through the air, because this chairman was just so like, he was like so sedated by something. It was just so cool because he had a kingdom. He was a king over 5,000
It
employees.
sounds like it almost went back in time, man.
It
Like
was.
a time
It was like
machine.
it was so exotic. Had this great opportunity to start making these trips. Now, the follow-on trips. Any questions? I'm going blah 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 blah
No,
blah.
it sounds good. I was just saying, it almost sounds like it's you know how, like, I always, I grew up kind of late 70s and the 80s, but in the 80s was kind of a special time, right? I mean, I'm just for music and just, culture and how everything was coming out of that. But it almost sounds like Korea, I'm going to say this Korea, but this Asian community that you're visiting is still many years behind our culture. I don't want to say our culture, but the times. So it sounds like when you go there, it's almost like kind of going into a time warp, right? Because you still see the kimonos.
Well, in essence, I'd say anytime you go to let's say a country that's the third world,
Yeah.
it might be Nicaragua, or it might be Venezuela, or it might be Kenya, or in those days it was included Korea. Now you've got you could still probably call Laos where I've been, or Burma where I've been. Those are definitely in a third world category still, but Korea was then. And what's amazing is how Korea, after the devastation and the split of their country in the Korean War, how they really worked their butts off to become, sixth most economically wealthy country in the world.
That's incredible.
So many famous companies that we all just take for granted, or household words, household names, like Samsung. I visited Samsung on my first few trips. LG, LG?
The LG, yeah. Got several other things right here.
You know what LG used to stand for?
I don't know.
Officially, that it's Lucky Gold Star. So
really?
we would go visit Lucky Gold Star. And they, back in those days, they were making ships, gigantic ships. Hyundai, the motor company, very successful. They're also, I think, still to this day, one of the largest shipbuilders in the world. These massive, I think they call them chaebols or something. And they would, these giant corporations, they would make everything. And some of them got into electronics, like Samsung. Some didn't do so well. Lucky Gold Star became Life's Good, LG. They became very successful in electronics. Some of the others, like Daewoo, Hyundai, they went a different direction, automotive, more heavy industry, and they're still global champions of industry. In Singapore, where I lived, so much of all the skyscrapers in Singapore, the projects are one, and the buildings are the 100-story buildings are built by Korean companies.
Wow.
Who come down and oversee the projects, the engineering expertise, etc.
Can you see a difference in the Asian cultures between different Asian countries? Like the Koreans different than the Singaporeans, which might be different than the Vietnamese, the Cambodians, stuff like that. Or I'm just wondering, because it sounds like Korea really got their shit together, right? I mean, seriously, going from zero to the
hard work. Yeah. They're ruthless. I mean, the sales guys that I would work with in Singapore, or just meet, dinner parties and so forth. There was a lot of people in Singapore working for other companies doing similar stuff to me. And in general, the comment was, the toughest place to do business, where you have to change over and do business their way, that's Japan. The corporations that always got the best price in the world, and you'd see it happen because they're so difficult in negotiating, was the Koreans. Koreans, tough negotiators, hard working. In the American school in Singapore, my sons would talk about, you've got all the the people, all the Americans at the American school, the occasional Chinese, a lot of Indian born, and Koreans. and it said everybody would be judged in sort of like one stratosphere, but when it comes to the Koreans, oh, they're in their own world. They're in another world. You can't compare me to a Korean, Dad. They're crazy. Their parents, stand over them with a switch, and they have to get up at 5 a.m. and take violin classes, and then they go to the algebra tutor, and then by 7 they're at school, and then they get out of school, and then they'll go to, I don't know, take swimming lessons, and then
nice, man.
listen, on weekends it would be, I don't know, tennis, or they were always pushed very hard, the Korean kids, and I imagine it's still pretty much that way. Because
could you imagine if you would have been born in Korea? Good Lord, they would have thrown you off a cliff, for God's sake.
Yeah. Well, I think my parents tried, even as Americans, to do that. I landed
so this is your second trip there. There's got it, like I said, we get more, but when I think of Korea, I think of MASH, because I'm borderline retarded too, but I also like their food, man. I mean, what about their food? You like Korean food?
It took me a while. I would say of all the Asian foods, it took me the longest to get used to Korean food.
Really?
I'll mention, I think it's very interesting that when you go to a Korean restaurant, you still basically 90% of all the Korean restaurants, you're still sitting on the floor.
Right.
Whereas the other Asian cultures have kind of gone up to chairs for the most part, unless you're in an older style, in a restaurant, traditional food type something or other, of which, there's still a lot of that. But the Koreans, I always found it very interesting that they served all the food. You'd sit down to eat, and let's say you're having bulgogi, very famous now in America. Bulgogi, it's my favorite form of beef eating, and it's marinated beef, and it's cooked in front of you, and all the juice flows off, and you can make a little sauce with the juice. But along with the bulgogi, they'll bring out like 7-8 dishes, with kimchi and maybe some potato salads. And all the bowls are like stainless steel metal. And then also the chopsticks in Korea, they're not wooden, they're not plastic. The chopsticks are also made of metal.
Really?
A uniquely distinguishing thing about Korean food. But another one of my favorite foods, of course, there's kimchi. And once upon a time, there was kimchi eaten in Korea. A person like 30 feet away walking towards you with what I would call the kimchi breath, which is, it's buried in the ground and it's fermented. It's fermented cabbage mixed with chili. And they put the red chili on everything that if you're eating, you get the red chili, but the kimchi breath, you would go right away. Oh, Korean guy, he's coming down the hallway here.
I'm telling you, man. I tell you, I'll give you just one little anecdote. I can't tell you this guy was Korean now, but I was in Fremont, California. You know where that's at? There, a little south.
Oh, yeah, it's just down around the end of the bay from Sunnyvale.
So I used to go to Fremont there.
That's where Tesla is, I think.
Yeah, I think so. I don't know.
Got their factory there. They bought some Chevy factory or whatever. Go ahead, please.
But anyway, I was in this little, I was introduced to sushi late in life, a lot of, I'm, in my late 20s, 30s, never had it before. Right. And so I was very interested anyway. So make a long story short. So I was on my own, went to the sushi restaurant. Right. But it was a little one, just a little one off the thing. And I was sitting there by myself, and I just ordered the normal stuff, right? I was kind of venturing off into the uni and every little things. But there's an Asian guy sitting kind of at the corner of the thing, and they're speaking Asian, and it goes underneath, and he pulls out this. Well, they were speaking something I didn't understand. It could have. I just grouped that all together. They're speaking
that Asian thing. They're speaking Asian.
They're speaking Asian, man. And he pulls out this pot from underneath the thing, underneath his the bar, and hands it to this guy, right? And he takes the top off and he starts eating this stuff, right? And the smell was repulsive.
It was kimchi.
I was thinking to myself, kimchi. What in the are you eating, man? For God's sakes, you know what I mean? But I'm telling you, I've smelled that kimchi, and I've actually tried it, and I just can't get past that.
I've not been able to acquire that taste.
I know we want to talk more about. So I mean, it's
let me
weird
talk
that we
a little bit more about like Seoul, Korea itself.
Yeah, Tell me about Seoul.
And you know, and I went through, as I'm traveling there more.
What year are we at?
Well, let's say I'm still around, let's say 1990. Okay. And we found our first formal distributor.
You're not located in Singapore yet, right?
No. I don't move to Singapore till 95.
Okay. I'm just trying to get time.
I'm spending about 2 months a year in Asia back in those days, mostly going to Japan and Korea, and then starting to go into Southeast Asia, Singapore, Malaysia, etc. But most of our efforts were in Korea first and then Japan. Because back in those days, Mark, as you know, we were starting to get into the telecom computer world, but we were still mostly aircraft connectors, i.e. defense. And so there was a big defense industry in Korea, still is. And there was some defense industry in Tokyo, but we met a distributor who thought he could take our military products and make them, successful in Japan. But that's another story. But anyhow, like I said, this one guy who I had met, whose wife was married to a general, he got us onto the Itaewon base, okay, which is like 40, 50,000 American GIs based there. And he got us to tee times to play golf on this very exclusive base course. And it's the only time in my life, because it's so exclusive and it's so hard to get onto this course. We tee off and it starts raining on the first hole. We played the entire round. Because this is such an exclusive, unique opportunity, we played 18 holes pretty much in the pouring rain.
Wow. How'd you shoot? You probably shot.
I think I probably shot maybe 75 or something.
In pouring rain. Not so bad.
No, I have no idea. I think it was like playing golf underwater. But also Korea was very famous in those times for making the best leather goods, leather jackets, leather shoes, purses, anything, all the best leather goods in the world made in Korea. And you could go to the shopping area right outside the base called Itaewon. One of the first things I ever learned was the phrase Itaewon kapshida. Itaewon, I get in the taxi, Itaewon kapshida. Well, that means I need to go to Itaewon quickly. Don't take me the long route where I have 3 times extra in the taxi. I'm faking like I really know Korean.
Yeah.
So I would try to plan a trip to Korea and then go to Itaewon in like November before Christmas every year and buy some really cool knockoffs, 1/3 the normal price of leather goods in high quality garments in Korea. So that was it made the trips there have a little special benefit bonus. And then, eventually they shut all that down because they're not supposed to be selling knockoffs, because it got to be a huge industry. And they eventually moved the base outside the town because, Seoul became such a huge and prominent and successful metropolis. The real estate was just too expensive, and it was so much a benefit for the government. I don't know what the deal was between the U.S. government and the Korean government, but they left and moved outside of town, and that whole Itaewon thing has changed. They talk about horrible traffic jams at places like Bangkok or in Paris. Nothing would compare with the traffic jams that started to arise around late 80s, 90s in Seoul, as everybody overnight got enough money to buy a car. And they had no highway structure. They had no metro system. And it was just a nightmare to get anywhere in Seoul, Korea back in those days.
I heard Koreans, I don't know, I don't want to sound stereotypical or anything like that, but I heard Koreans can outdrink anybody. Now, is that true? Do Koreans like to imbibe at all?
I'm not going to say they necessarily can outdrink anybody, but I will say that they probably drink more, especially in a business situation, even the Japanese.
Wow.
And it's not something that a lot of people know, but the Japanese, for people who know the Japanese, are considered, their biggest weakness is alcohol. But the Koreans, it is part of their way of doing business. And I think that is one of my reasons for success, is that I enjoy a drink or two or three. And the Koreans, that is part of the way they close deals, get to know each other. It's that networking of doing business people with, and you like, hanging with. So I have spent, the first thing is that they have this drink over there called soju, which is, that's the number one alcoholic beverage. It's some kind of like, I think it's like a potato vodka or something. I don't think it's made out of rice, but like 30 million pints are drunk every day.
30 million pints of soju.
Well, that was like 20 years
What does
ago.
it taste
Might
like?
be 100 million by now.
For our viewers, what does it taste like? Do they mix it with something?
It's kind of like a mixture of a flavor of sake and a kind of a hard vodka. There's more of a punch to soju than a vodka.
You don't mix it.
I don't want to stick on the soju too much, but you go to a Korean restaurant tomorrow, this next week, and order soju, and you probably can get it at a Japanese restaurant too. Soju is also drank in Japan, but I'm just going to say that two interesting things. There's been a number of nights. I remember in particular going out entertaining Samsung people, and they would ask for the $100 cigars. They would ask for the VSOP cognacs, and we would drink lots of beer and so forth. And there were numerous times where we wouldn't leave the bar until the sun's coming up. We're driving back to the hotel to change clothes, shower, and go out and do it again.
Wow.
It's not an uncommon scenario in Korea. There's a whole industry in Korea of people who drink a lot. There's a place called, it's the Samsung City, and it's this huge complex outside of Seoul, which is like a city. It's a humongous factory by itself. And then on the periphery of Samsung City, where let's say maybe 20,000 Samsung employees work, there's all these restaurants and bars. And I'd learned about this particular unique industry before that, this one, let's just say it's 8 o'clock. We started at 4. By 8 o'clock, not really anybody can even hardly walk,
Wow.
So what do? You call these companies where they come and they pick you up. They don't pick you up, they come, you give them the keys to your car, and they drive you home. 20 some years ago, 30 years ago, this was a vibrant industry in Korea.
Like Uber before Uber.
For drunk driving. Pardon?
Wow. It's like Uber or Lyft before Lyft. It's like the predecessor.
But they're coming and taking your car home. You're not leaving your car 3 hours away at Samsung City.
I get it. Do they keep it then? You have to wrangle it?
No. I'm sure that might happen, but no, not normal. So, interestingly enough, I don't want to go beyond what I really know, but I had a good friend who was a major supplier for Hyundai in the automotive industry. And, it's very common that you hear about some of the top officials in these major corporations having to go to prison for corruption.
Korean prison?
A Korean person breaking Korean law, going to a Korean prison. Yes, that's exactly it. And his statement to me is that
where else would they go?
I don't want to call it corruption, but it's just kind of the way they do business, maybe. But there's a lot of palm greasing. There's a lot of under table type of activities. And a lot of times it might include a government official. But almost every year there would be big press about maybe a Hyundai official or a Daewoo official or somebody in one of these big companies. He's off to prison. Generally, the word would be he didn't necessarily do it, the criminal activity, but he's the fall guy. And as you become the fall guy, that raises you up in the echelons, the hierarchy of the company. So it's almost like if you want to become higher and higher up in a Korean corporation, you maybe need to take the fall and go spend 2 or 3 years in prison.
Nice.
And that's how that's just kind of part of the system. There is a very unique and interesting system in Korea on almost how everything works. So
tell me about some of these big companies, though. I think that's interesting because you've gone from rags to riches in some of the companies that you had mentioned and some of the business dealings. So, yeah, I think that'd be interesting Tell a little bit about those big companies you dealt with and some of the interesting stories that go along with them, you know?
Yeah,
Or was that an interesting story? Did you go to jail?
that's oh, I've
Have you
Mo-
spent time in a Korean prison?
that's a whole separate podcast, Mark. There's a lot, spent a lot of time. No, and I'll say a lot of this, there was a real marked point in history where things changed so much in Korea, and that was the '88 Olympics.
Oh,
It
that's
just
right.
seemed like a very quiet, everything was super cheap, everything was just sort of under, inside and covered by that veil. The '88 Olympics came in Seoul, Korea, and that was
Well, the
like
Winter Olympics or Summer
a
Olympics?
launching pad for them to go global and become known and successful. The '88
Was it
Olympics,
summer? Was it Summer Olympics or Winter
yes,
Olympics?
it was the Summer Olympics.
Yeah, they caught that bomber too, man. He was trying to blow up the place. Remember that guy? He was blowing up.
Oh, I don't remember any bomber. That's just about every Olympics now, right? There's some things.
Somebody's trying to blow the Olympics up, you know. It's kind of like remember when Evel Knievel tried to jump the Grand Canyon when you were a kid, and you're thinking, well,
Yeah.
how the hell is he going to jump the Grand Canyon? I mean, it's a big place, you know. And I was thinking, how does a guy blow up the Summer Olympics? I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me. But so yeah, so Summer,
Yeah,
you know what? Do they have,
Crazy
you know,
what people will do.
you know what's interesting about the Olympics and like the World's Fairs and stuff like that? I'm sure if you go to New York, or if you fly into you fly into LaGuardia and you drive off LaGuardia, you can still see remnants of the, I don't know, 19 something World's Fair where they have all these relic structures and stuff like that. And then I guess the last Olympics in China, they built these atomic structures, right? And they're like abandoned now or something like that. I was wondering if you said it changed the direction of Korea. Do you think there's still any relics of stuff from the Olympics back in '88 that you can still see if you wanted to, or anything like that?
I'm sure they're there. It's just that there's no place that has changed as much as Seoul, Korea. From being, if we were out visiting a company 20 minutes outside of town, it would almost be, dilapidated, pothole filled 2-lane roads. Now there's a 12-lane highway, and everything's just gone so massive in scale. And Korea itself or not Korea, but Seoul itself is separated by the Han River, a massive river, and there's mountains all over it. So you're going through tunnels a lot. You're going around the mountain, which will be very steep cliffs, and into the next part of town. I mean, it's a city of over 20 million people.
She's coming around the mountain when she comes. Yeah. Anyway, Levi, I got a question for you too on this thing. I'm not familiar. So obviously in today's world, Kim Jong-un is a global threat, right? And he's a North Korean, right? Like, so the South Koreans obviously have this entity to the north, and yet they have thrived, right? You had mentioned, and they're now thriving, 6th largest economy in the world. What is their government over there? I don't know. For our listeners, what is it? Is it a democratic? Is it there's different kinds of governments. So I'm wondering what put the seeds in place for them to be successful, and why, and what's the relationship with North Korea? I
think it's strained. I think they try. Every politician who gets elected in Korea has a kind of a different approach, a hardline approach, or a let's embrace the brothers to the north. So many of the families in South Korea have relatives in the north. But North Korea is quite a different animal. I mean, as far as what kind of government it has, as far as I would refer to it or describe it, it's a communist dictatorship. Right.
No, I'm talking about South Korea, though. So I mean,
well, no, South Korea is a democracy.
Is it? So I mean, they have free elections and everything else.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's Asian democracies are let's say somewhat different, and I'm not going to claim to be an expert on the governmental system now in Korea. I know so many of the countries in Korea included, they were somewhat still run by the military when I first started going over there in the 80s.
Okay.
Martial law, like when I first started going to Taipei and all of Korea, Taiwan was still under martial law, and it was ruled by the military, until finally they got to a point of stability enough to where they embraced and started to implement democracy.
I got you.
So yeah, and it's sad what's going on, and it's really sad that this young man, what Kim Jong Il, or whatever his exact name is he could have taken North Korea into a much more positive and world embracing stance viewpoint, but he's turned it into some kind of wild and crazy little
It'd be interesting to go
you
there
know,
and check that out, wouldn't it?
pocket filling government for himself. So one interesting thing, back around 1990, I got a phone call from a representative of the CIA. And I thought, well, this is kind of weird, but okay. This guy was based in St. Louis, and I was in Springfield at that time, maybe 91 maybe. And so the guy came down to the factory in Springfield, and we sat down in the conference room, and he says, you go to Korea a lot, don't you? And you visit a lot of defense companies. And I'm like, well, I guess you know what I've been doing. I'm not quite sure how you find all this out, but there's I don't think there were that many American businessmen going over and calling on defense companies in Korea in the late 80s. And so probably not that hard to track what I was up to. And so I said, well, yeah, but how can I help you? I mean, South Korea, they're allies of ours, and there's really, I can't see what I can do for you all. I mean, I don't think I know anything that you couldn't find out yourself. And he said, well, you might be very surprised. Well, they might talk to you about certain things that they may not tell, somebody in the government, especially a CIA agent. Why do you, what kind of information? He says, well, we would just like for you to let us know what happens on your visits, what you talk about, what they're talking about, what kind of projects they're working on. And I'm like, I don't know. Let me think about it. But why do we need to find out what South Korea is doing? Is because they're our allies. And he kind of looks across the table at me and he says, we have to watch our allies very closely too. So
keep your friends close and your friend what?
Closer.
That's it. Whatever. I almost had it there.
So anyhow, I said I said, well, let me think about it. You get back to me, and I don't know. We'll see if it makes any sense, right? Because it seems a little bit sort of eerie almost.
Did he offer anything?
Say that to be suddenly like working for the CIA, and we never talked about any kind of a salary or anything, because they never called me back. They did approach me. And what happened in that period was,
you're like Positronics version of Chuck Barris, for God's sakes. You ever heard of the Chuck Barris story?
No, I don't. Let me finish my story. Anyhow, there was a regime change in America. We went from being governed by the Bush Republican Party to Clinton. I guess the Clinton establishment had no interest in what Bill Gentry was doing over in Korea. So, which was fine by me. I don't know. I mean, I may not be here today if because the Koreans might then start watching me if the Americans are watching me, and they know what, they've got a mole inside the CIA. But anyhow, it was just very interesting how I was approached very seriously, it seemed, to start gathering information for the CIA.
Well, listen, I want you to look up Chuck Barris's story, and then Chuck, you know who Chuck Barris is, right?
No, who is he?
Chuck Barris was the guy who was the creator of the Gong Show. Remember Chuck Barris? I don't even
know what the Gong Show is. I'm sorry.
What are you talking about, man?
When was the Gong Show?
It was a show in the 70s where he'd have like, it was kind of like today they've got, what's that show? America's Got Talent, or Britain's Got Talent. Right, yeah. It's all legitimate and you win shit. This was are you serious? You've never heard of the Gong Show?
I maybe have heard of it, but I don't think I ever watched it.
Okay, so it was back.
I was usually watching a little bit more, intelligent academic type of. Well,
this was more my speed, like pseudo retardism. But anyway, so they'd have acts on there, right? They'd have Jamie Farr, and they'd have JP Morgan, who was a woman at the time, and then they'd have different celebrities, and they'd have a big gong in the back, and these acts would come on, just it doesn't matter, you just play the guitar, sing, or tell comedy. It was just, and you get 30-40 seconds to do it, And if your act is terrible, they hit the gong and you get gonged. And at the end of the thing, somebody wins like $100. But anyway, the point being is that Chuck Barris was this huge television producer, right? Back in the 70s. He came up with, I think, The Dating Game and The Gong Show.
Please,
But,
Mark, what's the
but
point?
behind the scenes, he claims he worked for the CIA. And they've made a movie about this and stuff like that, that he's on set doing this stuff, but then he would disappear for like 2 and 3 weeks and come back. And he'd say he was on a mission over in Russia, killing people and stuff like that. And he'd come, and this is all, I mean, this is true. I'm serious. Look this up. So anyway, so that's what I said.
Well, you know, maybe I was that close, but
you were like
becoming the next
Positronics Chuck Barris, man. So anyway, people will get the second thing I want to talk about, just a couple things, and I'll get back to your stuff. A, do you think that the military buildup in South Korea has to do with their North Korean threat from the North? Or is it just because of other threats that you think they come out? I'm just curious. I mean, if Canada was a communistic country and, you know, and threatening us, you know, so I'm just wondering, what's life like living there with literally North Korea threatening you at every,
you know, it never felt like there was a threat imminent every
Really?
day. Never felt like that. I mean, I think, especially with 50,000 American troops there, the largest base outside the United States, maybe things would be different. And I still think there's a lot of Americans on the base outside of town now. But I think there's also other interests that we have throughout Asia having that base there. But the relationship with American military and the Korean military is very tight. You know, in some of the other countries, it becomes strained. I know we had to move out of a very large naval base in the Philippines, maybe 10 years back or so. I think the relationship between South Korea and America and the military is very solid, and everybody is in support of it for the most part. I'm sure there are people who are not. I mean, I will say that one time I went to Korea and there was a big demonstration, and it was all over the American press on television. Anti-American protests, get your military out of Korea. And I was kind of worried at the time that, you know, hey, maybe my life might be threatened by being in Korea at this time. And I called up our agent, and he just laughed and he said, you know, it's about 25 people down at the University of Seoul, and it's nothing to worry about. We love you. Please come. I never saw any demonstrations or anything of that sort. And I think the relationship between Korea and South Korea and America is probably one of the best there is on the planet, that at least that America has, is a solid ally.
Would you say it's
wrong? There could be all kinds of things going on behind the scene that I don't know about.
Would you say it's one of your favorite places on the planet to go to?
It has been, absolutely.
You know what's
I love the
popular?
Korean people. I love their hardworking ethic. Had a lot of great times and made a lot of money in Korea, you know, a little bit.
You know, we're talking about the past, but if you bring it to the future, I mean, or today, which would be the present, K-pop. Are you familiar with that?
I think it's incredibly well done and fun to watch. And K-pop's become really, really big in America, you know?
Yes, I know that. I mean, like I said, we're talking about Korea and stuff like
There's
that.
J-pop.
I was watching this New Year's Eve thing, and I'd never heard of these guys before, but they were highly entertaining, man. They could jump around, and I guess it's super popular over there.
Oh, it's big. It's a big deal. It's a huge deal. It's a huge deal globally. This is in one of those cases where, here again, Korean hard work and their quality of some of the products they make, they become world renowned. Hence, top industries, top economies in the world.
Yeah, Gangnam Style. You know what I mean?
Gangnam Style, that's true. You know, one of my first agents, distributors, probably of the 5 or 6 that we've had, maybe number 3, was also a gentleman named Mr. Kim.
Maybe it's the same guy.
His associate was a Mr. Kim, and we were introduced to them from a Mr. Kim.
Okay,
Or
can
it
I
might
say
have been a Mr. Lee.
it'd be almost being like in an Italian family dining room table in New York, Long Island, when you say, this is Tony, this is my cousin Tony, this is my other cousin, his name is Anthony, this is my other brother Tony. So everybody's named Mr. Kim.
Exactly.
Right? So you can just come into the room and say, hey, Mr. Kim, and everybody's like,
Oh, okay. Well, this guy, there was, one time we were out driving through the streets and we're through some of the back alleys in Seoul, which there's a lot, back off the main streets. And, we're always wearing suits back in those days. Always up until maybe 10 years ago, everybody wore like a two-piece
that's
suit.
the IBM effect, man. That's the IBM effect. Right there.
We were driving, I think we just finished lunch, and he comes up to this intersection, and I don't know, both cars, a car from our left up ahead and us, they banged into each other. Okay, so Kim gets out of the car, and he kind of just sort of like as a gentleman, gets out of his car and he goes up, and the other gentleman in the other car gets out, and the next thing you know, they're talking, and then all of a sudden it's
what?
They just start punching each other, and then they kind of straighten their ties, and he gets back in the car, and I'm kind of like, what was that all about? And he's like, it's nothing. It's just, it's the Korean negotiating. And it was just sort of so bizarre, so quick, so intense. The Koreans are considered somewhat pugnacious. They call them the Americans of the Orient, very individualistic and ready for a fight. But anyhow, there was another time where we're driving, and he said, Bill, I spent a lot of time. He doesn't speak good English, so he might have put it into way more broken English.
You should speak just like he talked to you. Speak just like he said.
Bill. Every time I do an accent, I sound German or Slavic. I only have one accent, and it's Slavic. So he says, I spent a lot of time, because every Korean man has to do his military service. And we shared barracks, and we shared all of our missions with the American military. So they were very much intertwined and co-working with each other in the days when he was in the military. So he said, Bill, there's this one word that I just never could understand. And now that we've gotten to know each other a little bit better, I could never figure out what it was that this word really meant, because it seemed to be used all the time, and it means everything. And I said, Kim, sure. What is that word? And he says, it's fuck. It's like everything that they talked about, we would use the word fuck in it. And it's like, I hate that fucking guy, or like, you're a total fuck. Or it's like they're constantly, the Americans are using this word.
That would be, that would
well,
be
there was this whole conversation about Korea only gets me up to like 1995, 97. In the last 20 some years, I've had a whole nother set of.
But when did you, from Korea? I know that you could edit all that other stuff, but from Korea to the point where you decided that you wanted to become Asian. And I really believe, in my heart of hearts, we'll look at you, it's Dr. Slice and Dice right there. Even though you were born in California, moved to Springfield, I believe if somebody took your DNA after all your international travels, I think that somehow you have been recombined, and then you're part Asian in some ways.
There's no question. I might be more than half Asian anymore,
really?
At least my viewpoint on life and my soul. I'm reading a book right now about how important the soul is, and we don't take care of our soul. And there's a disconnect that I still feel. I think I talked about it in the last podcast a little bit. There's a disconnect I have with Americans, because I have, through 25 years plus, picked up very many of the customs and the ways of thinking of the Asian. So I have very much, maybe not an Asian look, but I have Asian, very much a big part of my soul is now Asian. Sensei, grasshopper. I will leave you.
Hold on, open up your hand for a second. Put your hand up in that thing. Would you hold them? I just snatched the pebble from your hand. So.
Well, actually, the pebble was long gone before I raised it. You can't even see.
You cannot.
The pebble is in the other hand.
That's
We have
true.
we have much to learn.
I can't believe you know about Kung Fu, but you don't know about the Gong Show. I mean, it's like two different things.
I'm glad I don't know about the Gong Show. That is a twisted story, and I think there's
You should look that. Promise me you'll look that up just to tell you that.
was like Donald Trump before there was Trumponomics or whatever. All right, bye.
All right.
Gotta go. I'll catch you later.